Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
I'm Bob Israel, and I recently did 23andMe, the DNA test. It pretty much confirmed what I already knew. I'm half Ashkenazim and half Sephardic, an Ashkefard. I also discovered I'm 1.5% Neanderthal. It's true. A Jewish Neanderthal. Who knew? My father's ancestors and my ancestors fled the Spanish Inquisition and settled on the Mediterranean island of Rhodes. In the early 1900s, my grandparents left for America, leaving their own parents behind. In 1944, every Jew on the island was sent off to Auschwitz, and very few survived. I'm named for two of my father's cousins, Reuven and David. I'm Robert Darrell. That's Darrell with 2 R's. Thank you, Mom. My mother's side, all Eastern European, maybe a little Neanderthal. My parents met performing in a Broadway musical. My mother was beautiful, and at 99 and a half, she still is. She can also sing and dance. When we moved out to Long Island, when I was 4, we joined Temple Emmanuel of East Meadow. My father offered to direct a show to help raise money for the building fund. Guys and Dolls was such a hit, he followed with Pajama Game and Can Can. By the time I was ready for my bar mitzvah, the money was raised and the new chapel was completed. I sang my Haftorah surrounded by the love of my family as snow fell behind the beautiful stained glass windows, much like ours. Sadly, my father didn't make it to my 14th birthday. He was diagnosed with cancer in September and was gone 4 months later. All of us struggled with our grief in different ways. Back then, many people thought you avoided discussing things that were upsetting. The only place I could acknowledge my heartbreak was when I stood to say Kaddish every Saturday morning at Shabbat services. I could speak to God, and I could feel the embrace of my community. When I eventually went off to college, I didn't cut my hair or shave for the next 4 years. It was the 70s. I decided I was a Buddhist and a Hindu and a Quaker, which worked for me, not so much for my mother, but it worked for me. When I married a wonderful Jewish girl who lived in the Valley, whose mother was a former Hebrew school teacher, it was clear my Buddhist days were over, and we would raise our children Jewish. We wanted to give them all the things we loved about Judaism, and so we did. Between their Jewish preschool, making challah with grandma, and lighting candles every Shabbat, they were stunned when we told them more people celebrated Christmas than Hanukkah. They're still getting over that. It was several years after our kids' unforgettable bar and bat mitzvah that I became a regular around here. I was asked to lead the Joshua Project. I thought its mission statement of taking our synagogue from good to great was more than worthy of my time. The Joshua Project revived the Havarah movement at Unison. Highlights from our empty nester Havarah have included celebrating Shabbat like a bunch of drunken Hasidim, and a Seder where we each took on the identity of a character from the Passover story, featuring Stan Eisman as Pharaoh Trump and Paul Silverman as the Paschal Lamb, dressed as a Paschal Lamb. Chapter 2 also grew out of the Joshua Project. One of my favorite events was Rhythm and Jews, a Havdalah service, a lecture from Professor Jeff Melvoin, and then a sing-along of songs from the 60s emceed by Bennett Tramer and performed by our very own Juby brothers, now the Mavens. I didn't plan to stay involved as a board member and lay leader after the Joshua Project, but I have. It turns out what I've gotten back from this synagogue has been much greater than what I've given. When I found out my younger sister was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I broke down while Rabbi Feinstein counseled me. I prayed at this ark with Rabbi Simons, and when she passed away a year ago at this time, Cantor Shapiro led a beautiful memorial service in our backyard. The year leading up to that, I was part of a group of congregants that focused on wise aging, led by Mara Fine and the Cantor. Our monthly meetings provided us with a spiritual perspective on growing older and our own mortality. If you're wondering why I'm sharing with you my life as a Jew, it's because I'm hoping you'll be reminded of all that's there for us in a thriving synagogue community like ours. The truth is, where Judaism is concerned, we're all on different paths. Some of us have never left the path. Some of us have never found it. Some of us are new to it. And some of us are happy to walk along it just once a year. The invitation inherent in modern Judaism is to find your path. The opportunity available at this synagogue is to deepen the experience of your journey. As Rabbi Feinstein pointed out, Judaism is a resilient faith. When I studied for bar mitzvah, there were 19 boys in my class and one lucky girl. The beauty of Reform Judaism is it's open to change, and it's inclusive. It meets you where you are. I should warn you, now I'm going to segue into the hard sell, the annual appeal. Please know that after this, there'll be no more talk of funding tonight. We'll return to prayer, reflection, and song, but first, my appeal spiel. Our annual commitment isn't enough to cover our budget, and our budget isn't nearly enough to cover all that we could be doing. Despite our synagogue being surrounded by so much abundance, every year we must reduce the scope of our intentions to match the reality of our budget. We do a little with a lot around here, but we could be doing so much more. And here's why it matters. We live at a time where a synagogue can't afford to be good enough, or even very good. It must be exceptional. Earlier this year, the synagogue where I became a bar mitzvah closed its doors. After 63 years, Temple Emmanuel of East Meadow was forced to merge with a larger synagogue. 3 years ago, the Florida synagogue that my sister and her family attended for over 20 years also closed and merged with a much larger synagogue. This is becoming more and more common. We're lucky to have such a committed congregation at University Synagogue. But if we want this community to thrive as one that benefits from an intimate relationship with its clergy, staff, and teachers, we can't take it for granted. Because unless we place importance on teaching the next generation about our heritage and model our core values of fairness and social justice and celebrate the beauty of our tradition, we risk the very future of Judaism. And unless we convey our love of the land and dream of Israel and embrace its importance in the world, we can't expect the next generation to support it in the years ahead. Statistically, most Jews are unaffiliated with any synagogue, and a growing proportion of them are unlikely to raise their kids Jewish. Many experience their Jewish identity through grandma's cooking or maybe an annual Seder. Both are great, but it's not enough to fully appreciate the gift of our Jewish values, culture, and rituals. And I don't care how good grandma's kugel is. Many give very generously to national, international Jewish organizations, but not to the synagogue on the corner. Well, again, if we don't prioritize this, our local synagogue, the center of Jewish learning and faith, it won't always be here. It's as simple as that. This year, we celebrate 75 years as a congregation, a perfect time to reflect on the significance of this community. Because what this community is and what this community becomes is up to all of us. Its future, its fortune, its fate depends on each of you sitting here. Every year we must decide how committed we are to what this synagogue can offer our children and ourselves. If we want it to be exceptional, to offer all that it does and more, it really is up to us. So, if you're fortunate enough to be able to support this congregation more than you already do, tonight would be a good time to display the depth of your conviction and your generosity. Forgive me for interrupting our moving service with this appeal. May this Yom Kippur be a meaningful one, and for those of you who are fasting, may it be an easy fast. And if you need a pen or pencil, just raise your hand. The envelopes are contained in the packet in your prayer book. Thank you.